I guess I should start this the way every YouTube storyteller does. Even though it still feels strange for me to speak so casual about something that left a scar on my mind. But if you're watching this, go ahead and hit the like button, subscribe, and drop a comment if you want more real stories from my years as a Wisconsin state trooper. I share these when I can and when the memories don't hit too hard. And tonight, I'm finally ready to talk about the one shift that changed everything for me. I've told myself for years that I'd never share this. I kept it buried, locked behind the same mental door where I keep crash scenes, winter fatalities, and old calls that sit heavy on the conscience. But this night was different. It wasn't just a bad call. It wasn't just a cold body on the side of the highway. It wasn't even something I could explain on paper. It was something that didn't make sense then and still doesn't now. Something that made me question myself, my job, and even what I believe happens in the dark when no one is around to lie about it. But before I get into the nightmare, I need to tell you who I am. My name's Daniel Holt. I served as a Wisconsin state trooper for over a decade, and most of my patrols were along the stretch near Highway 51, between Wausau, Rib Mountain, and up toward the edges of the Oneida County forests. If you're from the area, you know what winter feels like up here. You know how the wind cuts through everything like a blade, how the freezing rain turns a highway into a glass sheet, and how the forest sits so silent and black at night that you can't shake the feeling something is watching you from between the trees. People think being a trooper is all about writing tickets or pulling over drunk drivers. But most of our work in January is responding to crashes. Cars flipped into ditches. Trucks slid across lanes, vehicles abandoned with their lights still blinking through the snow. You learn pretty fast that black ice is the real killer. It hides everywhere, looks harmless until the second your tires lose control. And then you're just a passenger. I've seen too many good people taken by it. That night, this story starts on one of those shifts. A long, empty, bitterly cold night in January. The kind of night when even your patrol car feels colder inside than out. The kind of night where every breath looks like smoke coming out of your mouth. It was close to 2:30 in the morning when I pulled into a gas station on the edge of Wausau. I remember the buzz of the fluorescent lights above the pumps, the way the ground salt crunched under my boots, and how my uniform felt stiff from the cold. I grabbed a cup of coffee inside, even though I knew it would taste like burnt dirt. At that hour, you drink it anyway. You need something to keep your eyes open. When I got back into the squad car, the radio crackled a little. Not unusual in bad weather. Dispatch was sending out routine updates, and I listened while warming my hands over the heater vents. Snow was expected to pick up around sunrise. A small accident had been cleared near Merrill. A road closure was being considered farther north. The usual stuff. I sat there for a while, letting the coffee cool in my cup holder. The roads were quiet. Too quiet, really. Even the occasional trucker seemed to be avoiding the highway. I didn't think much about it then. Winter nights can go from silent to chaotic in a heartbeat. I figured the calm was a blessing while it lasted. Around 3 a.m., dispatch finally called. Unit 12, we've got a possible stalled vehicle just past mile marker 214. Caller says no hazard lights. Car looks empty. Can you check it out? I remember sighing, tossing my coffee back into its holder. A stalled vehicle wasn't unusual, but the timing, 3 a.m. is when things get strange. People fall asleep behind the wheel. Cars run out of gas. Sometimes you find the driver wandering the shoulder in a daze. And sometimes the car is empty with no footprints around it. A detail that always puts ice in your stomach. I acknowledged the call and pulled onto the highway. The trees blurred past like dark walls on both sides. Snow drifted in soft waves across the asphalt. The bright beams of my headlights seemed swallowed by the night. I cracked my window slightly just to hear something other than the hum of the engine, but the cold air stabbed my face so sharply that I rolled it back up. A few minutes into the drive, my radio began acting up. The dispatcher's next update broke apart mid-sentence. Stall vet east copy. Daniel, do you read me? It sounded like someone else was speaking under her voice. A whispering, a faint dragging sound. Static, sure, but too soft, too human. I tapped the radio. Dispatch, you're cutting out. Say again. Nothing. Just a low hiss that faded into silence. I told myself it was weather interference. Happens all the time. Towers get iced. Signals bounce weird. Still, something in that hiss made the hair rise on the back of my neck. I kept driving. The deeper I got into the forest line, the darker everything felt. There were no houses out here. No streetlights. Only the thick miles of woods, hunched over with snow like they were bowing in the wind. I checked my side mirrors and caught a glimpse of the sky behind me. No moonlight at all, just heavy clouds like a lid settling over the world. Somewhere around mile marker 211, I saw something that made my brain halt for a second. A figure. It stood at the tree line on my right, just barely inside the beam of my headlights. Still, upright, pale. I slowed down just enough to focus, but the snow whipped past and blurred the view. When I turned my head fully, the figure was gone, like it had never been there. I let out a slow breath, trying to talk myself down. It was probably a shadow, a broken branch, a trick of the snow. Your eyes do strange things at night, especially after hours of staring at white flakes floating through your headlights. Still, I couldn't shake it. A mile later, I reached the place locals call Dead Curve. The name started as a joke decades ago because of the tight bend and the steep drop into the woods, but over the years it gathered stories. Drivers seeing things, cars swerving for no reason, people claiming they spotted someone standing in the road before disappearing. Troopers aren't supposed to believe in that stuff, but every patrol car has heard the rumors. My GPS beeped, signaling the location of the stalled car. Its hazard lights weren't on, just like dispatch said, but the headlights were faintly glowing through the fogged-up windshield. Snow had piled over the hood and back window, so it must have been sitting there a while. I slowed my squad car, pulling up behind with my own hazards on. The red and amber reflections shimmered across the snow like bruised colors. The moment I parked, everything fell silent. No wind, no passing cars, no radio chatter. Just the soft ticking of my engine cooling down. I took a deep breath and stepped out into the cold. The air hit my face, so hard it made my eyes water. I adjusted my hat and started walking toward the stalled vehicle, one hand on my flashlight, the other near my holster out of habit. The snow crunched under my boots in that loud, lonely way it does when there's no other sound around. Something felt wrong. I felt it before I saw anything. A kind of pressure in the air. Like being watched. I approached the driver's side. The windows were completely fogged, but something was moving behind the frost, just a faint shape shifting slowly, like someone leaning forward or turning inside the car. I stopped dead. My hand tightened around the flashlight. I leaned in closer, trying to see through the fog. The hazard lights from my squad car clicked in a steady, hollow rhythm behind me. Tick, 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 echoing in the cold air like a heartbeat. I called out softly, "State Trooper, is anyone inside?" No answer, but the shape behind the glass moved again, slower this time, like it was turning to face me. I felt the cold spread across my shoulders and down my spine, and suddenly the quiet didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt alive. I wiped a patch of frost on the window with my glove, leaned down and looked inside. And that's exactly where I'll leave this chapter, because the next moment is something I can still see in my dreams. Right then, right as my eyes met the dark space behind the fogged-up glass, the shape inside shifted again, and something waited for me on the other side of that window. Something that shouldn't have been there. For a moment, I couldn't move. My breath fogged the window again, hiding the shape inside the stalled car. Whatever I thought I saw in there had already slipped into the shadows. My heart thudded hard enough that I could feel the beat in my throat. I stepped back, trying to keep my voice steady as the cold air stung my lungs. I forced myself to speak up. "State Trooper, if you can hear me, answer back." Nothing. No shuffling. No voice. Not even the faint outline of movement behind the glass. I gripped the flashlight harder, opened the driver's door, and the hinges groaned like they hadn't been used in years. A wave of freezing air spilled out, so cold it felt unnatural. Cars left out in Wisconsin winter get cold, sure, but this felt like walking into a freezer someone had unplugged hours ago, but somehow still held the frost inside. The seats were stiff with cold, My breath fogged the air inside the car. A thin layer of frost coated the dashboard and the edges of the steering wheel. No keys in the ignition. No personal items. Nothing that told a story about who the driver might have been. But then I noticed the headrest. Long strands of dark hair were stuck to the fabric, frozen into thin curls like brittle threads. Someone had been sitting there, recently, long enough for the hair to freeze, but not long enough for it to feel abandoned. That alone would have been enough to raise alarms. But what sent my stomach sinking deeper was the doorframe. Snow had drifted inside, lightly, like the door had been left open earlier. That didn't make sense. The door had been shut tight when I arrived. My flashlight beam slid down the ground outside. Footprints. Bare footprints. The toes had pressed into the snow, the way toes sink when skin touches frozen ground. No boots. No shoes. Just bare feet walking away from the car, leading toward the tree line a few yards off the road. I stepped out, following them carefully. The wind pushed soft snowflakes across the prints, but they were still clear. Whoever left them wasn't wearing socks. The shape was exact, clean, and deep, almost painful to look at. My mind kept repeating the same thing. No one could walk barefoot in this cold and just keep going. But someone had. I followed the trail, counting the steps as I went. The prints led past a patch of tall frozen weeds, through a drift of soft snow, and then they ended. Just ended. Not faded. Not blown over. Stopped, like whoever was walking had taken one more step, and simply vanished into thin air. No slide. No turn. No scramble back. The last footprint was half-pressed, like the heel had touched but the toes never came down. I stood there, staring, feeling the quiet pushing in from all sides. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I said into my radio. "I have footprints leading away from the vehicle, but they stop abruptly. Can I get back up out here?" The radio hissed. Then a harsh, sharp static scream tore through my headset, loud enough that I ripped the device from my shoulder. It wasn't normal static. It had pitch, tone. For a split second, it sounded like a woman's voice woven inside the noise. I swallowed, tried again, but the radio only gave me a scratching whisper. The signal was gone. I turned back toward the highway, shaken and unsure what to do next. The stalled car sat there with its empty windows, the hazard lights from my squad car clicking in the cold air. I started walking back, brushing snow off my jacket, try to convince myself this was just a technical issue, just a normal call taking an unusual turn. Then I saw her. A woman stood behind my patrol car, right in the center of the road. The red hazard lights flashed over her pale skin, turning her face into a cold, shifting mass of color. She had long, wet hair that clung to her shoulders and hung over her chest, almost frozen in place. She wore a thin white dress, far too light for the weather, and her feet were completely bare, planted directly on the icy highway. I froze. She didn't look up at me at first. She just stood there, swaying slightly, her arms hanging at her sides, her hair dripping as if she'd just stepped out of a lake. The wind pushed the hem of her dress, but she didn't seem to feel it. I took one slow step toward her. "Ma'am." My voice cracked without my permission. "Are you hurt? Are you the driver of the vehicle?" Her head lifted. Not fast, not jerky, slowly. Her eyes found mine. They didn't look wild or panicked. They looked empty, like she was staring through me, not at me. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" She parted her lips like she wanted to speak, but the sound that came out was too soft to understand. More breath than voice, more air than words. So faint I had to lean a little closer to hear. Her arm rose, shaking, pale, pointing toward the woods. The same woods where the footprints had ended. "Do you need help?" I asked. "Are you trying to lead me somewhere?" But she didn't answer. She only kept pointing. Her finger never wavered, despite how much the rest of her trembled. I took a cautious step forward, then another. My hand hovered near my radio, even though I knew it wasn't working. Every instinct told me something was wrong. Nothing about her made sense. No one could stand barefoot in this temperature without falling down or screaming from pain. No one could walk this far barefoot at all. The wind pushed a gust of snow across the road, and the sound of a truck engine rose behind me. A semi barreled around the bend, tires crushing the snow, its headlights sweeping across the scene. I stepped aside quickly, raising a hand to warn the driver. The truck roared past with a thunderous blast of wind that threw snow up in a white wall around me. When the snow settled, she was gone. The highway was empty, completely empty. I rushed to the spot where she'd been standing. No footprints, no marks, nothing disturbed except a thin layer of snow pushed by the truck. I ran my hands over the road surface, looking for blood, for hair, for anything that could tell me she'd been hit. But there was nothing. It was impossible. I had been looking right at her. The truck couldn't have passed through her. If it had hit her, there would be something left. My breath quickened as the realization hit me. She looked familiar. Not like someone I'd met, but like someone I'd seen in a file. A missing person report from years ago. A woman with long dark hair and a thin white dress. A woman whose abandoned car had been found near the same stretch of road, her last known footsteps leading toward the woods. I didn't want to say her name out loud, not even to myself. It felt wrong. I backed up toward my patrol car, shaken in a way I hadn't felt in years on the job. I grabbed my radio, desperate for any sound other than my own breathing. "Dispatch! This is Unit 12. I whispered. "I need backup at Dead Curve." Immediate response. "I have a possible missing person sighting," and the radio clicked. Then a faint, low breathing came through. Not mine. Slow. Wet. Clothes. I stared into the dark tree line, feeling the weight of the cold press deeper into my bones. Something was out there. Something watching. Something waiting. I tightened my grip on the radio as the breathing faded. "Dispatch, please respond." But the line went dead again. And that's where the next chapter begins, because the silence that followed wasn't just silence. It was the beginning of something I never should have witnessed on that icy highway. The breathing on the radio faded so slowly that, for a second, I wasn't sure if it had actually stopped or if my mind had just filled the silence with the echo of it. The cold inside the squad car felt sharper now, like it seeped into my bones while I was standing out there with that woman, or whatever she was. My gloves shook as I shut the door and cranked the heater. The vents pushed out weak, uneven bursts of warm air, but none of it made me feel any better. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, staring into the frozen darkness beyond the windshield. Snow swirled across the road, blowing in thin sheets like pale ribbons being pulled from the woods. My heart was still thudding from the encounter, and I could feel the beat in my fingertips. I tried to breathe slowly, to calm myself, but each breath came out tight and shallow. "Think, Daniel," I muttered to myself. "Just think." Talking out loud made me feel less alone. It reminded me I was still in control, that my mind hadn't snapped under pressure of the cold or the silence. I'd dealt with strange things before. Car wrecks that didn't make sense. Drivers found wandering miles from their vehicles. People swearing they'd seen someone run into the road when no one was there. Winter does something to people. The dark does too. But this was different. I rubbed my eyes and leaned back in the seat. My breath fogged the inside of the car for a moment before the heater cleared it away. I tried to make sense of what I'd seen. Bare feet, wet hair, the thin white dress, the way she pointed toward the woods like she was begging for help or warning me about something, and the way she vanished when the semi passed. No body, no trace, no footprints. The human brain always reaches for something logical, even when logic doesn't fit. Mine tried anyway. Maybe she crawled under the semi. Maybe the truck driver grabbed her. Maybe the snow covered her tracks too fast. But each explanation fell apart the second I said it in my mind. I knew what I saw. I wasn't exhausted or hallucinating. Something had been standing there, and it wanted me to see it. I swallowed hard, trying to settle my nerves, and my thoughts drifted to the old stories I'd heard from senior troopers. The ones they told only at night, usually with a laugh, as if humor could hide the truth inside them. Dead Curve had a reputation, one that stretched back years, maybe decades. I remembered Trooper Hendricks telling me about a figure he saw crossing the road one January night in the late 90s. He said he slammed his brakes, slid sideways, and came within inches of hitting a woman with long black hair. But when he stepped out to check on her, she was gone, not a footprint in sight. Then there was Lieutenant Marks, who once found a backpack in the snow, right in the middle of the shoulder. Fresh. Zipper still shining under moonlight, but there were no tracks leading to it, no sign of anyone nearby, and the owner was never found. Even the old-timers joked about hitchhikers who disappeared before you could blink. Men sworn to logic, reason, and procedure still spoke in hushed tones about that stretch of highway. Dead Curve wasn't just a dangerous bend. It had a story. And for the first time, I felt like I was stepping into that story instead of hearing it from afar. I ran a hand over my face and thought back to a case I'd read years ago. A cold case. A haunting one. A missing woman named Emily Hart. She had vanished in 1998 during a winter storm just like this one. Her car had been found abandoned near this exact stretch. Doors unlocked. Interior cold. Footprints leading toward the woods. Then nothing. Search teams spent days combing the forest. Dogs picked up her scent only to lose it a few yards in. Her case file stayed in the patrol office for years. The photo of her face slowly fading from the paper as new recruits cycled through. A pretty woman with long dark hair and a white winter dress that looked too thin for the season. My chest tightened. The woman I saw on the road tonight looked almost exactly like her. I couldn't ignore it. I grabbed my phone. My hand still trembled, but I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number of someone I never expected to call again. Retired Sergeant Tom Miller. He'd been a trooper long before me, for decades on the road. He was the one everyone called a walking library of highway ghosts. He used a patrol Dead Curve back when it was just another nameless bend on a quiet road. He'd told me once, during a late-night training shift, that Dead Curve had a memory. At the time, I laughed it off. Now I wasn't laughing. I pressed call. It rang twice before a groggy voice answered. Hello? Sergeant Miller, it's Holt. Sorry for calling so late. There was a rustle on the other end, like he was sitting up. Holt, is everything okay? I'm at Dead Curve, I said. My voice cracked a little, and I hated how unsettled I sounded. There's a stalled vehicle, and I saw someone. A woman. Silence. A long, heavy silence that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Describe her, he finally said, his voice lower than before. Barefoot. Long dark hair. Thin dress. Looked wet. Looked cold. And she pointed toward the woods. When a semi passed, she vanished. Another long pause. Then in a quiet, steady voice, Miller said, You need to leave that area. Right now. The seriousness in his tone hit me harder than the cold. What do you mean? I can't just leave. There could be someone out here who needs help. Holt, he said, firmer this time. Listen to me. Men who stayed too long near that bend didn't come back the same. Some came back shaken. Some quit. Some, he stopped. Some didn't come back at all. A chill ran through me even with the heater blowing. You've seen her before, haven't you? I asked quietly. He let out a shaky breath. Back in the 80s. Took a call about a stranded couple. Snowstorm. Middle of the night. I found the husband waving me down, scared out his skin. Said his wife walked away from the car barefoot, and he couldn't stop her. What happened? I saw her, he whispered, just like you described, walking along the shoulder. Thin dress. I called out, but she didn't turn. When I reached her, she was gone, vanished like fog. My heart started beating faster. Who is she? I don't know, he said. Some troopers say she's that girl from 98. Some say she's older. Some say she's not one person at all. But whatever she is, she doesn't want to hurt you. Not exactly. Not exactly? I repeated. She tries to bring people with her, he said. Into the woods. Towards something. I could feel it when I saw her. A pull, like she wanted me to follow. Something anchors her there. Holt. Something old. I swallowed hard, gripping the phone tighter. What should I do? Leave, he said again. Just leave, before she comes back. A loud crack of thunder, or maybe a branch snapping, echoed somewhere deep in the woods. The storm was getting worse. Snow pounded the roof of my car. I opened my mouth to respond, but the line clicked and went dead, just like the radio, just like everything else out here. I stared at the phone screen for a long moment, the quiet pressing in so hard it felt like weight on my chest. Miller's words rang in my head over and over. She tries to bring people with her. Something anchors her to the woods. I looked up, instinct pulling my eyes toward the dark tree line beyond the stalled car. At first, I thought it was just wind moving through the branches. But then I saw it, a faint, flickering light deep within the woods. Too warm to be headlights, too steady to be lightning, too controlled to be a reflection. It bobbed once, then again, like someone walking with a lantern. The storm whipped snow across the glass, but the light didn't go out, didn't fade, didn't move away. It waited, as if it knew I was looking, as if it wanted me to follow. And with that quiet pull tightening in my chest, I realized this night was far from over. The light in the woods didn't flicker like a flashlight or a reflection from a car mirror. It had a warm, pulsing glow, the kind you'd expect from an old lantern swinging in someone's hand. I stared at it through the falling snow, trying to blink away the cold stinging my eyes. Every logical part of me screamed not to go near it, not after everything I had already seen tonight. But there was something else in me, some quiet pull I couldn't explain, that kept nudging me toward it. It didn't feel like curiosity. It felt like someone calling me. I opened my car door, the wind instantly blowing snow inside. The heater had barely warmed me, but stepping out into the open air made the cold hit my chest like a punch. Still, I walked forward, boots crunching deep into the growing snowdrifts. The forest edge was darker than I remembered. The trees were pressed close together, branches leaning in like they were guarding whatever waited inside. The lantern light pulsed again. I took a slow breath. Just don't be stupid, I whispered to myself. Stay logical. Stay calm. But my feet kept moving. The moment I stepped past the first row of trees, the sound changed. The wind that had been howling across the highway went silent, swallowed by the forest. The snow fell thicker here, heavier, almost like being inside a snow globe someone had shaken too hard. I could hear each flake landing on my jacket. I could hear my heartbeat. But nothing else. No animals. No branches cracking. No wind. Nothing. The silence was so complete it made my ears ring. I followed the lantern glow deeper into the woods, the beam of my flashlight cutting thin, shaky lines across the snow-covered ground. My breath clouded around me, disappearing almost instantly in the cold. Every step felt quieter than it should have been. The trees looked strange, taller, older, their trunks swollen and blackened with age. The snow beneath me wasn't smooth anymore. It had mounds and dips, like something had disturbed it earlier. I kept stepping carefully, afraid of what might be hiding just below the surface. The light pulled me forward. Then, suddenly, the trees opened up into a small clearing. Even in the dark, I could make out the jagged shapes of old remnants. Broken fence posts sticking out of the snow, half rotted with planks scattered like bones. A collapsed structure rested near the center of the clearing, its charred beams rising from the ground like the ribs of a long-dead creature. It took me a moment to understand what I was looking at. The foundation of a burned cabin. The lantern light bobbed above the ruins, glowing faintly as if someone invisible was holding it. The warmth of its color didn't match the cold around me. It fell out of place. Wrong. But I couldn't look away. I stepped closer, my boots sinking deep into the untouched snow. The air here felt thicker, almost like it resisted my movement. My breath grew shorter, not from panic, but from the strange pressure in the clearing. My flashlight dimmed slightly, flickering at the edges of its beam. I crouched near a pile of broken boards, brushing away snow that had settled on something solid. My glove scraped ice, and underneath it, I found a small bracelet. Thin, silver, and bent, like it had been caught in something violent. I turned it over my hand, and the letters scratched into the metal caught the lantern light. Yates. Emily Hart. My chest tightened so fast it hurt. I wasn't sure if I said her name out loud, or if the forest echoed it back to me. But the moment the initials registered in my mind, the lantern light dimmed. It didn't go out completely. It hovered weaker now, like it was waiting. I stood up slowly. That's when I heard it. Crying. Soft. Fragile. Close. Too close. It sounded like someone standing right behind me, just a breath away. The hairs on my neck rose immediately. My heart climbed into my throat. I spun around, flashlight trembling in my hand. No one, no figures, no shadows, just the clearing, the broken cabin foundation and the snow-covered trees. But the sound kept going, quiet sobs broken uneven like someone trying not to be heard. They were so close I could almost feel the breath of them. I shined the flashlight behind me, then to my left, then right. Nothing but snow. Then I lowered the beam and froze. Footprints. Fresh footprints circling around the exact spot where I stood. Bare footprints again. Small, spaced strangely, as if someone had been walking around me in a slow loop. But I hadn't heard anything. No crunch of snow. No movement. Nothing. My mouth went dry. Hello? I called out, though my voice barely rose above a whisper. The crying paused, then changed. The soft sobbing stretched into a low hum, a long, vibrating sound that seeped through the trees and echoed inside the clearing. The pitch shifted, rising and falling like someone humming an old, sad tune. The sound didn't feel like it came from one direction. It came from everywhere. Above me, behind me, beneath the ground. The lantern light flickered harder. I stepped backward, breathing quicker now. Every instinct in me told me to get out of that clearing before something terrible happened. I turned toward the path I thought I'd come from, but the trees didn't look the same. They were taller, closer, leaning inward like they'd moved while my back was turned. The pathway I thought was open now looked twisted, the branches weaving into arches that didn't exist before. I picked another direction. Sure, I just got turned around. But that path closed too. My pulse pounded in my ears as the forest seemed to shift with each step I took, steering me deeper instead of letting me out. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the air like the woods themselves were singing. Stop. I whispered. Stop, please. The hum didn't stop. I broke into a run, pushing through branches that grabbed at my jacket. The forest felt wrong, like the trees were arranged in patterns that shouldn't exist. Every direction led me into shadows. Every shadow felt alive. I stumbled into another small opening between trees, and finally saw a break in the canopy. I could see the faint glow of the highway through the snowfall. A few streetlights cutting weak beams across the road. Relief crashed through me so hard I nearly fell to my knees. But the relief vanished instantly. Under one of the streetlights, standing perfectly still in the swirling snow, was the woman. Bare feet, thin dress, wet hair hanging like frozen rope down her back. Her head tilted slightly to one side, like she was studying me. Her arms hung at her sides, fingers stiff, as if the cold didn't touch her at all. She didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. I froze. The lantern behind me dimmed even more, its glow a weak trembling light. The hum faded, replaced by the sound of wind picking up again. The forest felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. I stared at the woman under the streetlight. She stared back. Her face didn't twist or shift. It held this empty, heartbreaking expression, like she wanted something from me but didn't know how to ask, or couldn't. I took one step forward. The lantern light went out behind me. The woman's head straightened slowly. She didn't walk. She didn't step. She just changed distance, like the space between us folded. I blinked, and she was suddenly only a few feet away, close enough for me to see the drops of melted snow running down her pale cheek, close enough to hear her next breath, close enough that I couldn't pretend she wasn't real anymore. And that's where everything truly began to unravel, because nothing in my training could prepare me for what came next. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The woman was only a few feet from me, close enough that I could see the faint shimmer of frost clinging to her eyelashes, close enough that I could hear the soft sound of her breath, or what should have been breath. But no warm air came from her mouth, no fog, no pulse under her skin, Just a stare so empty and so sad that it made my stomach twist. I took a shaky step backward, her head tilted again, slow and deliberate, the way someone studies a creature they don't understand. My flashlight trembled in my hand, the beam cutting across her face. For a second, her eyes seemed to catch the light in a way that made my chest tighten. They weren't dull. They were reflective, like glass, like frozen water. I blinked, heartbeat in my ears. And she was gone. Just gone. No fading away. No running. No slipping behind the trees. One moment she stood inches away, and the next the clearing was empty except for the whisper of snow falling on branches. I stumbled backward, so fast I tripped over a buried root and nearly fell. My breath came out in jagged, uneven bursts. I didn't know if the cold or the fear shook my hands more. I turned and started pushing through the trees, desperate to get back to the highway. The forest still felt wrong, twisted, moving, but adrenaline shoved me forward. Branches scratched across my jacket. Snow filled my boots. Every direction looked exactly the same. But somehow, as if the woods finally gave a hold of me in, the trees opened and the faint glow of a streetlight broke through the darkness. I stumbled into the open air and saw my patrol car sitting across the road like a lifeline in a sea of white. I hurried toward it, practically sliding the last few feet on the icy pavement. My hand reached the door handle, and another set of headlights appeared behind me, cutting through the swirling snow like a flare. I spun around, squinting as the old pickup truck rolled to a stop. The engine rattled, the exhaust sputtering out white smoke that mixed with the blowing snow. The truck's door swung open before the engine even fully idled. A man climbed out, a rugged-looking guy in his late 60s, heavy coat, patched gloves, gray, beard stiff with frost. His face was pale, tense, like a man running from something he already knew too well. He waved me over quickly. "You!" he shouted over wind. "You need to get off this road." I hesitated only a second before crossing toward him. Every instinct told me to trust the urgency in his voice. The wind roared between us as I reached him, gripping the side of his truck to steady myself. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, leaning close. "Not tonight." "I'm a state trooper," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I was responding to a stalled vehicle, but he cut me off with a raised hand. "I know why you're here, and I know what you saw." My breath caught. "What do you mean?" The man glanced toward the woods, his jaw tightening. His eyes were filled with something worse than fear, recognition. "My name's Harold," he said. "Harold Linden. And I've seen her too." For a moment, I thought I misheard him, but his face didn't change. He wasn't joking. He wasn't confused. He was deadly serious. "You've seen her?" I whispered. He nodded once, more times than I care to count. The wind blew snow across the road in fast-moving sheets. Harold motioned toward the passenger door. "Get in the truck," he said. "You're freezing, and we don't have long before she comes back around." I didn't argue. I opened the door and climbed into the worn passenger seat. The upholstery was cracked, and the interior smelled faintly of old pine and gasoline, but the heater blasted warm air against my frozen face. Harold slid in beside me, slammed the door shut, and locked it as if that would keep out whatever he feared. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. The storm pounded against the windows. The heater hummed. My hand shook uncontrollably. Finally, Harold spoke, his voice low and heavy. "She comes out in storms like this," he said. "When the wind gets too quiet and the snow gets too thick. When travelers get tired and the dark plays tricks on them. That's when she walks." I swallowed. "Who is she?" He stared straight ahead at the fog windshield. "Nobody knows her real name. Some say she's a spirit of a logging worker's daughter. Some say she's that missing girl from '98. Some say she's older than any of the stories we've heard. But all the stories agree on one thing." He turned to me. "She died in these woods, frozen, alone, and she's been trying to drag people back with her ever since." My stomach tightened. "I found the remains of a burned cabin," I said, "and a bracelet with initials scratched on it, H." Harold closed his eyes. Emily Hart. So you know her story. I know more than her story, he said softly. I know what this place used to be. He leaned forward, rubbing his hands together like the memory alone chilled him. Back in the early 1900s, that forest was a logging camp, he said. Rough place. Men worked long hours, lived harder lives. One winter, a stove caught fire in one of the cabins. Flames spread fast. Too fast. They say a young woman, one of the cooks, ran barefoot into the snow trying to escape. She didn't make it far. I felt a cold shiver that had nothing to do with the storm. And she's a spirit people see? I asked, maybe it's Emily Hart using the same path she took in 98. Or maybe all these tragedies created something else altogether. Something tied to this land. Something hungry. He let out a shaky breath. But whatever she is, I've seen her enough times to know the pattern. What pattern? She tries to lead you off the road. She shows you a light, an old lantern, and pulls you deeper into the woods. She points. She cries. She makes you feel sorry for her or scared or both. And if you follow too far, his voice broke slightly. You won't come back. The heater hummed louder, filling the silence between us. My hands tightened into fists. You said you've seen her before. I said, how many times? 4 or 5, he said. But the first time, that was the one that mattered. His eyes clouded with grief. I lost my brother out here. I didn't speak. Harold stared at the dashboard, jaw clenched hard. It was 99, a night like this. We were driving home from Merrill. Snow started coming down, so fast we had to pull over. My brother was always the curious type. Thought he saw a lantern in the woods. Said someone might be lost. Harold took a shaky breath. He went after it. My chest grew tight. Did you go with him? I tried. His voice cracked, but he was faster. I lost sight of him only seconds after he stepped off the road. I followed his tracks as far as I could, but the storm wiped everything clean. By morning, they found him a mile into the forest. I swallowed hard. Alive? Harold's eyes glistened, frozen stiff, kneeling like he'd been praying. A heavy silence settled over the truck. The storm outside seemed to pulse against the glass, like it wanted in. I'm sorry, I whispered. Harold gave a small nod of thanks, though his eyes stayed on the windshield, unfocused. That's why I come out here sometimes, he said. Storm nights, when I feel that pull in the air. He turned to me, voice hardening, to warn people, to stop them before they follow her light. My pulse quickened. She led me to the burned cabin. I said, the bracelet, the crying, footprints circling me. The forest felt different. Because you're getting close to what keeps her here, Harold said. Something ties her to that place. Something she left behind when she died, or something she's still searching for. He leaned closer, gripping my arm. You described the lantern. That means she wants you to follow. I felt the weight of his words settle like ice in my stomach. Why me? I asked quietly. Harold shook his head. No idea. Maybe she thinks you can help her. Maybe she thinks you're the next one she'll take. But either way, you're marked now. The wind howled again, louder this time, almost a scream. The truck rocked slightly in the gust. Harold wiped his face, took a breath, and looked me dead in the eye. If you want to stop her, he said, you have to end her suffering. You have to destroy whatever anchors her spirit to that burned cabin. How? I asked. You'll know when you find it. Outside, the storm seemed to thicken, the snow falling in heavy sheets that swallowed the world beyond the glass. Harold leaned back, his voice barely above a whisper. Whatever she lost in that fire, whatever she still clings to, you have to find it and let it go. Otherwise, she'll keep walking these woods forever. And she'll keep taking people with her, just like my brother. A hollow silence filled the truck. Finally, Harold said the words that tightened my chest more than anything else tonight. End her suffering, son, before she ends yours. And as he spoke, I realized an awful truth. The lantern light had reappeared in the woods, closer than before, waiting. The lantern light flickered in the woods again, brighter than before, pulsing through the storm like a heartbeat. Harold stared at it with a look that mixed fear and grief, the way someone might look at an open grave they were forced to step toward. I could see his breath shaking in the cab of the truck, even though the heater blasted warm air across the windshield. "She's calling you," he whispered. The words hit something deep in my chest. I didn't want to agree with him, but I felt it too. A tug, a pressure, a pull so quiet I might have mistaken it for instinct. But it was stronger than instinct. It felt like a memory I didn't have, a promise I never made. "Storm's easing up," Harold said, opening his door. This might be the only chance we get to go back there without getting trapped. The wind had calmed in the last minute, leaving only a slow fall of thick, heavy flakes. Not peaceful exactly, but quieter. A space between breaths. We stepped out into the cold, the snow grabbing at our boots like the forest didn't want to give up its claim. Harold zipped his coat higher and adjusted his gloves. He didn't look at me. His eyes stayed locked on the faint glow between the trees. "Stay close," he said. "And if she shows herself, don't look too long. Don't listen too long." I didn't tell him that I already had. We crossed the road, our boots sinking into drifts that rose almost to our shins. The lantern faded as we approached, disappearing behind the thick trunks, but the pull remained, guiding us forward. The forest swallowed the distant hum of my squad car engine the moment we stepped inside. The silence fell heavy again, thick enough to press against my ears. I used my flashlight to cut through the shadows, but its beam seemed weaker than before, like the dark pushed back. Harold walked ahead, moving with the slow, cautious steps of someone who had done this before and hated every second of it. The deeper we went, the more twisted the path felt. Branches arched overhead like skeletal fingers. Snow weighed down the limbs, making them dip low, forcing us to duck. After several minutes, the clearing opened in front of us. The burned cabin ruins looked worse than before. More charred, more broken, as if the storm had somehow peeled away another layer of time. The collapsed beams sat half buried under a blanket of snow, their blackened edges melting tiny holes into the white surface. The remnants of the fence stuck out crooked, leaning forward like they were bowing toward us. Harold stopped at the edge of the clearing and took a shaky breath. This place, it never stays the same. Fire does something strange to the land. And this fire, well, it wasn't natural. He didn't explain what he meant, and I didn't ask. My attention was pulled toward the ruins, toward the place where I'd found the bracelet. I stepped ahead of him, drawn by something I couldn't ignore. Harold followed, keeping close but constantly glancing over his shoulder. "We don't have much time," he murmured. We began digging through the snow, pushing aside burned wood and ash-soaked debris. My gloves quickly soaked through with freezing water. Each handful of snow felt heavier than the last. The metal of my flashlight slipped against the ice. I couldn't tell if the shaking in my hands came from the cold or the fear. "She left something behind," Harold said. "Something that ties her here. Spirits don't hold ground without reason." "What would it be?" I asked. He shook his head. "Could be anything. A keepsake. A memory. Something she owned. Something she touched last." He knelt beside me, pulling off a layer of snow for what looked like the blackened remains of a dresser. The wood crumbled under his hands. "You feel that?" he whispered. I did. The crying. Faint at first, like wind slipping under a door. But not wind. Softer. Human. A desperate sound, muffled but everywhere at once. My heartbeat thumped harder in my ears. The hairs on my arms rose beneath my jacket. "It's starting again," Harold said. "Hurry." We dug faster, tearing away snow and charred splinters. The crying grew louder, pressing into the clearing like a cold mist. It wasn't behind us. It wasn't in front of us. It was around us, above us, beneath us. And it sounded like the moment someone finally realizes they're alone. My glove scraped something hard beneath a collapsed beam. I brushed away the ice, revealing something metal. A rusted box, wedged under the weight of burnt wood. The top was bent, cracked open at one corner. "Help me," I told Harold. He grabbed the beam and lifted with a grunt while I dragged the box free. The crying surged for a second, echoing in my skull, then dropped to a shaky whimper. I set the box between us. It was cold enough to burn my palms even through my gloves. Rust covered the edges. Black soot stained the corners. The metal felt like it vibrated faintly, almost like a heartbeat. I pried the lid open. Inside lay a half-burned diary, its pages curled, edges scorched black, a small silver locket on a thin chain, tarnished but intact, and a melted lantern top warped from heat. My breath caught in my throat. Emily Hart had been carrying a locket the night she went missing. I remembered reading that detail in her case file. The diary. I didn't know about that, but the lantern piece made sense. The old logging camps had used lanterns like these. I lifted the diary carefully. The pages were fragile, but a few words were still legible. I tilted it toward my flashlight. Cabin. Burned. Returning tomorrow. Want to see where it happened? Lantern. Follow. Harold leaned in closer. She came here, he whispered, before she disappeared. Suddenly, the crying stopped. The forest swallowed every sound, leaving behind a cold, thick silence. My breath fogged out in front of me. Harold's eyes widened. Something moved at the edge of the trees. We both turned. The woman stood there. Her hair hung like wet ropes. Her dress fluttered even though the air was still. Her bare feet sunk silently into the snow. Her eyes were filled with tears that didn't fall, frozen in place like tiny beads of glass. She lifted her hands and reached toward me, fingers trembling. The pain in her face was so raw it felt like it reached inside my chest. Harold stumbled back. No, she's angry now. We dug too deep. We found what she didn't want found. No, I said softly. She wants us to find it. She showed me the lantern before. But Harold shook his head violently. You don't get it. Spirits don't cry louder unless something's wrong. She's not guiding you anymore. She's panicking. The wind tore through the clearing then, sudden and violent, like the world inhaled sharply. Snow kicked up in blinding swirls. The trees groaned. The air turned sharp enough to sting my eyes. The woman stepped closer. Her lips parted with sound that wasn't quite a sob, wasn't quite a breath. The diary in my hand vibrated, and then the sadness hit me. Not mine, hers. It crashed into me like a wave. Fear, grief, loneliness, the final moments of someone trying to run for help, only to be swallowed by cold and darkness before reaching salvation. The emotion flooded my mind so fast I staggered backward. My throat tightened. My eyes stung. Harold yelled something I couldn't hear. My ears rang. The wind screamed. And then, right behind me, a voice whispered into my ear, soft, trembling, almost childlike. Please. Just that one word. A plea so full of pain that it felt like it pierced straight into my spine. I turned toward the woman again, heart pounding, vision blurred with tears that weren't entirely my own. Harold grabbed my coat, shouting, pulling me away from her, but I barely felt his hands. Because I finally understood. She wasn't trying to hurt travelers. She wasn't trying to drag anyone to their death. She was trapped, alone, desperate for someone, anyone, to find what she lost the moment she died. The pieces in the box weren't just relics. They were anchors, and she needed someone to set her free. My breath trembled as I clutched the diary to my chest, and that's when the truth settled in my bones like ice. She didn't want revenge. She wanted release. That realization sat heavy in my chest, cold in the wind. She didn't want revenge. She wanted to be found. She wanted someone to know she had died out here, alone and afraid, still reaching for a road she never reached. The air around me shifted. Snow began to fall harder, turning from soft flakes into a thick white sheet. The trees blurred. The ruined cabin, Harold, even the distant idea of the highway seemed to slide away from me. It felt like the storm closed its hand around my body and squeezed until everything else was pushed out. For a moment, there was no forest, no road, no wreckage. Just snow. Just her. I felt her before I saw anything. A pressure between my shoulder blades. A cold line along the back of my neck that never quite became a touch. A sadness that sank into my ribs like ice water. I didn't turn. I couldn't. My muscles locked up. My breath grew small and careful, like my own body was afraid of what would happen if I moved. The world dimmed. Then it shifted. I wasn't in the clearing anymore. I was seeing through her eyes. The pale beam of my flashlight vanished, replaced by the harsh orange glow of fire. Flames raced along a wooden wall, chewing up boards, reaching for the roof. Sparks flew into the black sky. Men shouted in panic, voices breaking, boots hammering frozen ground as they ran with buckets and blankets. My feet were bare. The snow cut into my skin with every step, sharp as broken glass. I looked down and saw small, pale toes going red around the edges. An old lantern swung in my hand, its metal handle digging into my fingers. Its light bounced over the snow and tree trunks, jumping with every terrified stride. I was not myself. I was her. Fear poured through me so strong it made my lungs burn. Smoke clawed at my throat. The fire behind me roared, too fast, too bright, swallowing the camp in big, greedy bites. Someone shouted her name, but the wind ripped the sound apart and tossed it away. She ran, barefoot, shaking, heart pounding, so loud it sounded like a drum in her ears. For a short stretch, the forest opened ahead. A dark gap between tall pines led away from the glow of the flames. She clutched the lantern tighter and held it out like a small, weak shield. Its golden light drew thin circles on the snow, showing roots, rocks, and slick patches of ice. But the fire didn't stay behind. It glowed against low clouds, turning the whole sky into a dirty orange lid. Shadows twisted in strange shapes. The trunks seemed to lean, bending toward her with long groans like they were alive and listening. She stumbled. The lantern slipped. I felt the handle slide out of her grip, felt the horrible, weightless feeling of an empty hand. The lantern struck a rock hidden under the snow. Glass shattered with a sharp crack. The flame flared once, then died with a hiss as the snow rushed and smothered it. Darkness slammed in. Her breath caught. Now there was no light. No clue where the road might be. No way to tell if she was still headed towards safety or deeper into nowhere. The storm rushed in like it had been waiting. Wind punched between the trees, throwing snow sideways. It filled each footprint almost the second it formed, erasing her trail as if the world refused to admit she'd ever been there. The orange from the fire faded into a faint smudge behind her, then into nothing at all. She turned left. She turned right. All she saw was white and shadow. Every tree looked the same. Every shape shifted when she blinked. The wind screamed and dragged the sound of her own ragged breathing around her, making it feel like someone else ran just out of sight. She called out. No one answered. She tried to listen for the road, for wheels, for voices, for anything that sounded like people. All she heard was a storm clawing at the branches and the dull, heavy beat of her heart. Time softened at the edges. Her feet went numb. The sharp pain faded. Her legs grew heavy, each step a little slower, a little shorter. The cold climbed up her body like a careful, patient thing, taking and taking. Her fingers forgot what warmth was. Her cheeks burned, then turned to a deep, tired ache. Still, she walked, but it wasn't running anymore. It was a slow, stumbling shuffle. Fear loosened its hold, and confusion slid in. Had she passed the road already? Was it behind her? Was she walking in circles? She looked for her own tracks, but the snow was smooth. The storm had wiped everything clean. She tried to scream again. The sound came out thin and cracked and vanished into the wind, like it had never existed. The trees blurred at the edges of her vision. The white around her pulsed darker, then lighter, as if the world itself was breathing. She thought she saw small, warm lights in the distance, little lanterns hanging in the trees, swinging gently, waiting for her. She tried to walk toward them. Every step only made them seem farther away. Her strength finally broke. Her knees dropped into the snow. It rose up around her thighs, heavy and soft at the same time. She put her hands out to catch herself, but they disappeared into the drift. She couldn't even see her fingers. She tried to push herself up. Her body refused. The shaking in her muscles slowed, then stopped. The cold folded over her like a heavy blanket. For a brief moment, the stillness almost felt like relief. Her eyelids grew heavy. The world shrank into a small, white tunnel. Her last thought was not of the camp. It was of the road, of how close it might be, of how, if she had turned just a little more, she might have seen a light, heard a voice, felt a hand pull her to her feet. But she never reached it. She froze there, alone in the storm, waiting for help that never came. The vision shattered. I was back in my own body, on my knees in the snow near the ruins. My chest ached like I'd run for miles. My lungs pulled in sharp, icy air that didn't feel like enough. My cheeks were wet. I didn't remember when I had started crying. The storm around me was a white wall again. The trees were faint, dark streaks behind it. Sound was muffled, like there was cotton inside my ears. But I wasn't alone. I felt her beside me, her presence pressed against my skin, cold and heavy and full of grief. It wasn't a monster's presence. It wasn't rage. It was a lost, raw confusion that throbbed in the air. She didn't know she was dead. In her mind, she was still out here in the woods, still trying to reach the road, still pulling herself toward any light she saw. Every time headlights slid across the snow, every time a trooper's hazard lights flashed, every time a phone screen glowed in the dark, she thought, that one, they'll help me. No wonder she pointed toward the trees. No wonder she cried on the shoulder of the road. She thought she was guiding people to safety. Instead, she was leading them back toward the place where she fell. The pull inside my chest changed. It didn't feel like a trap anymore. It felt like a plea. A quiet voice without words, begging, help me, see me, finish what I couldn't. I pushed myself to my feet, my legs shaking, and felt her urge me forward, not with force, but with desperate hope. She moved ahead of me, a pale outline in the blowing snow. Her edges blurred like the storm might erase her if she stopped. Her hair drifted behind her. Her dress shifted even in the still patches of air. There were no footprints where she passed. I followed. We walked away from the burned foundation and deeper into the trees. The world shrank to gray trunks and white air. My fingers throbbed inside my gloves. My toes felt like blocks of stone in my boots. Part of me wondered if I had really come back from her memory or if I was still walking out the last steps of her life. She slowed near a fallen tree. Its trunk lay sideways, thick and dark, with its roots yanked up out of the ground like a frozen claw. Snow had drifted against it in a tall, smooth mound. She turned to face me. For the first time, something clear and sharp shone in her eyes. Not just pain, not just confusion, recognition. She raised one shaking hand and pointed down at the base of the tree, not toward the highway, not toward the cabin. Down, here. My heart hammered, so hard it made my vision blur. I dropped to my knees and began to dig. The snow burned my hands, even through the gloves, but I kept scooping it away. I clawed through packed drifts and hard ice, and then into the frozen dirt beneath. My fingers caught on roots and small stones. Then they hit something that wasn't rock or wood, something brittle. I cleared more snow and soil aside and saw it. Bones. Old, yellow bones folded into the earth. A rib cage caved in on itself. A spine curled as if trying to turn away from the cold even after death. Long, matted strands of hair clung to the dirt. Strips of rotten cloth hung from the bones, the last scraps of a dress eaten by time. My throat closed. The wind howled through the branches above us, but the little space where I knelt felt still and trapped, like the air itself was holding its breath. Slowly, I lifted my head. She stood silently over her own resting place, watching me with eyes that now knew I'd seen how she died, and that I had finally found where she had lain all these years. For a long moment, I couldn't move. I stayed kneeling in the snow, staring at the bones beneath the fallen tree. The storm swirled around us, but it felt far away, like I was inside a quiet bubble made of cold and memory. She stood there above her own resting place, her pale figure glowing faintly in the white haze. The sadness in her face wasn't sharp anymore. It was softer, almost peaceful, like she finally understood what I'd seen. My breath fogged out in front of me. My hands were trembling. I didn't know if it was the cold or the weight of everything I'd just witnessed. Maybe both. But I knew what I had to do. Slowly, gently, I reached into the shallow hole I had dug and lifted her remains one piece at a time. Her bones were light, almost weightless, like they had given everything to the earth years ago and only the shape remained. The strands of hair clung to my gloves. The strips of cloth crumbled at the slightest touch. I held all of it with the care I'd give to a living person. Because in that moment, it felt like she was still here with me, still trusting me. "You're not alone anymore," I whispered. "I found you. I'm here." The words came out shaky and thin, but saying them felt right. Necessary. Something in the air shifted at the sound of my voice. The storm above us slowed, then softened. Snow fell in steady, gentle flakes instead of heavy, violent sheets. It was as if the woods themselves had stopped to listen. I laid her bones carefully on the surface of snow, arranging them with small motions, trying to honor the shape they once held. Her figure drifted closer, her pale form growing clearer the more I uncovered. She didn't reach for the bones. She only watched, eyes shining with something like relief. My chest tightened as I opened the rusted metal box we had found at the cabin ruins. The locket inside lay cold and tarnished, but the chain was still intact. I held in my palm, brushing away the soot that clung to the metal. When I tilted it toward my flashlight, the engraving on the side glimmered faintly. Yates, Emily Hart, the girl whose case file I had read years ago. The girl who vanished into a storm. The girl nobody found, until now. I knelt beside her remains and set the locket gently on top of the cloth and bone. The moment the metal touched her, the air warmed, not much, but enough that I felt it against my frozen face. A faint light glowed around her bones, soft and golden, like a lantern burning behind fog glass. I looked up. She was changing. The hard lines in her face eased into something calmer, almost human. The dark circles under her eyes brightened. The trembling in her hands stopped. Her hair, which had hung in stiff, wet ropes, drifted upward like it was caught in a breeze I couldn't feel. Her dress smoothed out, no longer clinging to her like a damp shroud. She stepped toward me. My breath caught as she reached out, her fingers hovering above my shoulder. The tips of them touched my jacket. Not heavy, not cold, but light, like snowflakes landing on skin. And in that soft, weightless touch, I felt a rush of warmth deep inside my ribs. A warmth that wasn't mine. A warmth that felt like gratitude. Her lips parted. She didn't speak out loud. No sound came from her mouth. But I saw the word clearly, shaped by the faint glow around her. Thank you. My throat tightened, so hard it hurt. A lump rose into my chest and refused to move. I didn't know if crying was the right reaction, but my eyes burned anyway. I had seen bodies on winter roads before. I had held dying drivers in my arms. But this moment was different from anything my badge had ever prepared me for. She stepped back. The glow around her brightened. It wasn't blinding. It wasn't sharp. It was warm, like the last light of sunset filtering through a window. Her figure thinned, as if the wind was slowly pulling her apart. Snowflakes drifted through her body and dissolved in the glow. Her hair lifted higher. Her hands fell to her sides. The sadness in her expression faded completely. Then, like smoke unraveling in the air, her body dissolved into drifting white flakes. They swirled upward, then outward, mixing with the falling snow until I couldn't tell where she ended, and the storm began. The glow faded. She was gone. The clearing was quiet again. Not the heavy, threatening quiet from before, but a peaceful, heavy stillness, like the forest had exhaled after holding its breath for decades. The snow fell lightly, brushing soft patterns onto bones and the locket. Behind me, the crunch of slow footsteps broke the silence. I turned to see Harold standing at the tree line, his face pale, his eyes shining with tears that clung to his eyelashes. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His expression said everything: shock, relief, grief, and something deeper. Closure. He stepped closer, but stopped a few feet away, like he didn't dare disturb the moment. "She's gone, isn't she?" he whispered, his voice shaking. I nodded. "She's free." Harold let out a slow breath. His shoulders dropped as if a weight he had carried for decades finally slipped off. His eyes drifted to the bones laid out on the snow, then back to the empty air where she had stood. "I always hoped someone would find her," he said softly. "My brother," He wasn't the only one she reached for, but nobody understood what she needed. Nobody listened. She wasn't trying to take anyone, I said. She was trying to be found. Harold wiped at his eyes with the back of his glove. Then God bless you, son. You did what the rest of us couldn't. The wind brushed past us, gentle, almost warm. For the first time all night, nothing felt threatening. Nothing whispered. Nothing watched in the trees. The woods felt lighter, open, like the shadows themselves had lifted. We stood there in silence, the kind of silence that sinks deep and stays, the kind that doesn't frighten but settles a mind. I looked one last time at the locket, the faint golden snow still dusting the bones, and I knew we had done what she needed. I closed the metal box around the remains as carefully as I could. Harold helped me lift it, and we carried it together toward the edge of the clearing. My hands felt steady with the weight in them, like I finally held something that had been waiting for years to be touched. When we reached the path back to the highway, I paused and turned. The woods were still, calm. For the first time since the night began, the forest wasn't whispering or bending or changing shape. It stood silent and peaceful, as if the land itself finally rested. The kind of silence that felt like a blessing. The first peaceful silence of the whole night. The silence that settled over the woods that night stayed with me long after Harold and I made our way back to the highway. It wasn't the heavy, eerie silence from before. This one felt softer, almost warm, like the forest itself had finally loosened a breath it had held for years. We carried the metal box between us, careful not to let it tip or jostle. When we reached the shoulder of the road, the last traces of storm clouds parted enough to show a pale stretch of early morning light. Harold said nothing. I said nothing. Words felt too small for what we'd just done. We loaded the box gently into the back of my patrol car. The moment it touched the seat, the wind eased again, like the woods were giving us permission to leave. Harold stepped back, looking at the forest one last time, his eyes wet with a peace I hadn't seen in him before. "I think she's really gone," he murmured. I nodded, though part of me still felt hollow. "I hope so." He gave me a tired smile, patted my shoulder, and trudged back toward his old pickup, the snow crunching lightly under his boots. I stood there for a moment, watching his shape fade into morning haze before finally calling dispatch. My radio worked on the first try. No static, no breathing, no strange interference. Just the tired voice of the dispatcher answering, as if the night had been nothing more than a slow shift. "Unit 12, go ahead." It took an hour for rescue crews to arrive. The sun rose during that time, dull and weak behind the heavy clouds. The world shifted from storm-beaten darkness to the calm gray of early winter morning. Harold stayed in his truck, hunched over his steering wheel like he needed time to gather himself. I didn't question it. I needed that time too. When the crews reached us, they moved quickly, setting markers around the area, taking photographs, examining the site. I gave them the location of the remains and the details about the collapsed cabin area. But I left out everything else. I didn't mention the lantern. I didn't mention her footsteps circling me in the snow. I didn't mention the vision, the whisper, the feeling of her hand against my shoulder. Some stories don't belong in official reports. Harold stepped up beside me while I talked to the lead investigator. He confirmed what I said about the ruins and the discovery of the bones, but he didn't add anything more. His eyes stayed focused on the snow-covered trees, as if he expected her to appear again. But she didn't, and the forest didn't shift. The air stayed calm. When the crews finally left with the remains sealed in a clean white container, I watched the doors of the transport truck close. A small knot of emotion twisted in my stomach. It wasn't sadness, exactly. Not fear either. It felt like the quiet after a long cry, raw, but lighter than before. For the next few weeks, everything went back to normal on paper. I filed a report. I logged the call. I attended the follow-up review. But inside, things weren't normal at all. I felt empty, not in a painful way, but in the way you feel when something deep inside you shifts and you're left waiting to understand it. Like a heavy weight had been lifted off my chest. But now there was space where the weight used to be. I slept more deeply, but woke up with a strange ache behind my ribs. I found myself drifting into thoughts about the woods while I drank my morning coffee, staring out the window as if expecting snow to start falling again. At night, when the station grew quiet, I caught myself scanning old case files without meaning to. One file in particular, Emily Hart. I read every page again. Her age, her last known movements, the way her parents describe her as hopeful and kind. Her disappearance had left them shattered. I tried to imagine what it must have been like for them, year after year, wondering where she had gone. But now, I knew the remains we had found matched her description closely. The few personal items found near the site lined up almost exactly with the details in her file. When I closed the folder, there was a certainty in me I couldn't explain. We had given her family an answer they never had. We had given her a place to rest. I didn't tell anyone that part. Not Harold, not the department, not anyone. Some truths feel too fragile to speak out loud. Each week, I drove past Dead Curve during my patrol rotation. At first, I tensed each time, expecting to see the faint figure of a woman on the shoulder, her hair hanging in wet strands, her bare feet sinking into the snow. I expected the whisper of the storm, the pull of the lantern, the hum that vibrated under the skin. But none of that happened. The air around the bend felt different, not warm, exactly, but lighter. The road didn't feel heavy to drive through like it used to. The trees seemed still and calm. The silence wasn't threatening. The curve didn't feel like something watching anymore. It felt like something had finally gone to sleep. I didn't know if others felt it too, but I did. Every single time. Still, some habits die hard. I always slowed down as I approached the bend, my headlights sweeping across the trees. My eyes stayed alert, searching the snow for tracks, for shadows, for anything familiar. Most nights I saw nothing. But once in a while, just once in a great while, I thought I saw a faint glow deep in the forest. Not bright, not moving, just a soft, steady light. A lantern's light. The first time I saw it, my heart jumped. My breath hitched in my throat. But the light didn't feel wrong. It didn't pulse or flicker or pull. It simply hovered there, peaceful, like the last ember of a fire dying slowly in the night. I started to understand. It wasn't a warning. It was a goodbye. A reminder that she wasn't lost anymore. Weeks passed, and the snow eventually melted. Spring crept into the woods around Dead Curve. The trees budded. The air warmed. The days stretched longer. But sometimes, even in daylight, I felt the faintest memory of that night. The hush of the storm, the glow of the lantern, the soft touch on my shoulder. I found myself standing by the roadside more often than usual, looking into the forest like I expected her to drift out one last time. But she didn't. The woods felt settled now, balanced, like the grief woven into the ground had finally loosened. One evening in late April, after a long shift, I parked my patrol car near the bend and stepped out into the thawing air. The sky had gone pale gold, the sun slipping behind Rib Mountain. Birds called softly in the trees. The wind brushed past me with a warmth I hadn't felt on that road in a long time. I walked to the edge of the forest, hands tucked into my jacket pockets. Snowmelt dripped from branches. The smell of damp earth rose from the ground. I stared into the trees, the same place where I once followed a ghost and found the truth buried in ice. "I hope you found peace," I murmured. The woods didn't answer, but they didn't need to. As I turned to head back to my patrol car, a tiny flicker of light caught my eye. Not far, not deep, just a soft shimmer between two trees. It glowed for a second, warm and gentle, then faded. I stood still, watching the darkness settle where the light had been. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with a strange, lingering question. One I wasn't sure I wanted answered. Had I truly helped her move on? Or had I only woken something older, something that had been sleeping beneath those trees long before she ever ran into the storm? The breeze rustled the branches. The faint echo of winter brushed past my ear. And as the last light of day faded, I realized some stories don't end. They change shape. They wait. They watch. And sometimes they flicker like lanterns in the woods, leaving you to wonder what might still be out there in the silence, waiting for the next traveler to pass by Dead Curve.